cold, but people are itching to already be in Trinity Village, and then like well into late fall, people are holding on to their dying days of summer. And
yeah, and you just kind of hang out all day in the sun, because I think you just want to take advantage of the good weather when it's good here, because it's so bad so often.
I just can't. I hate winter. Like the thing I hate most about Toronto is winter. Like I just like it's like too cold today. It is April 25th. It should be nice. There should be buds on the trees by now. Well, I don't know, but by my calendar, there should be buds on the trees by now. Like the little blooms outside should not be fighting for life every night against a frost. Like, this is absurd. It starts in November. This past year it was like end of October, and it's now the end of April, and so that's 7 months. It's too much. I'm so fed up.
I think Toronto in the winter for visitors is garbage, and I would never recommend anyone come here in the winter.
We have a very lively arts and culture scene.
We're like bursting at the seams in some ways. There's so much going on in theater, dance, and music. There's so many different parts of the community. They almost function on their own, which is weird because sometimes you run into somebody within that community you've never met before. But they're part of some other microcosm within a microcosm.
Particularly because Toronto, being one of the major cities in the country, is a hub for a bunch of different national organizations. So like the National Ballet of Canada, the Canadian Opera Company, all of these are national organizations. They have national or Canadian in the name, for goodness sakes. World Stage, Canadian Stage Company, or Can Stage, whatever. These are companies that presumably they are in Toronto because it has the largest population and therefore the largest audience by which to draw from. And they do a whole breadth of programming. So within the country, I would say Toronto is probably has the liveliest, most varied arts and culture scene that you can get within the boundaries of this country.
In that respect, it's a beautiful thing, and I think the downside of that sometimes is that there's so many people that want to express themselves and they want to do work that it's kind of hard to find that closeness within the community. And I think a lot of younger companies like that I'm aware of and that I know of are really trying to push that envelope and find ways to work with other companies in unique ways and kind of push things forward and to give people a taste of what we really can offer. But I think it's just difficult. It's just so expensive and space is so expensive. So I think that's the one challenge of it. But I think the upside is that there's so much to experience. You could literally walk down a street and find something that's arts oriented and have a good time.
And so for me, it's like, well, it's not necessarily, the art is not very accessible in Toronto, I would say, based on a financial stat alone. It's not particularly, there's not a lot of types of it happening in a way that's accessible, but via its geography and its organization and structure. Like if I want to see a comedy show, I have to move away from the theater district to go do that. Like I have to go to Ossington and Bloor where all the comedy clubs are now currently. The hip ones, the cool ones, the ones where good stuff is happening, like Bad Dog and Comedy Bar are all at Ossington and Bloor, which is very far from, say, like the DuPont Bathurst Strip where you have Factory, Tarragon, TPM not so far away from that Bathurst Queen area. You're not really in, like that's one streetcar going north-south that you can take and hit 3 theaters. You're not really in the same neighborhood. Everything's a bit isolated in that way. There isn't a district where you can like show up and then like see a bunch of, like it's interesting to me that we don't have, our city isn't designed around a lot of those things or don't have those things, whereas often in other cities, like, have more of those things integrated in their design and their structure, and so that's an interesting choice as well. And that we're a young scene. I think I have to always remind myself that when I get frustrated by where we are as a community. In our arts in Toronto, we're very young. So there's not always a lot. I think I wish I wanted stuff more challenging or more fascinating or more groundbreaking than I'm actually getting most of the time from specifically the theater scene, and then also from like the art scene as a whole. There are some companies bringing in international touring productions. Like World Stage is really good at the Harbourfront. I think they do a really good job. Big ups to Tina Rasmussen because she's really killing it all the time with her programming. Canadian Stage does too, but I find them a little hit and miss. Like sometimes I'm like, I don't really want to see that weird show that you brought from, and then another show they bring in is amazing and is absolutely phenomenal. But so I feel like they're still trying to find their ground. But what's also difficult about that is you're named Canadian Stage and yet most of your season is international shows. So like that's a bit of a, maybe rename your theater company or like rebrand yourself or like change your mandate or something. It's hard to sometimes always understand. We're constantly in this push and pull where we're like trying to make work and produce work and still get our voices out there, while at the same time balancing that with the need to bring in other art that challenges the way we make art.
I think like every day I wish it was easier to get around Toronto. So like I know it's so cliche at this point, but like more transit. Ugh, please.
Toronto's transit system is...
I hate the public transit so much.
You know what? We probably don't give it enough credit because it's definitely not as bad as some other cities. It's fairly simple to understand.
But I think other than that, like it's I feel like democracy works here pretty well. So, yeah, just more transit.
I wish our government worked better. I wish, particularly at the municipal level, I'm just so fed up, particularly with people who think that all three levels of government should just stick to the things that they were relegated to back in the day when we first signed everything. I think that's just boo-hickey. That's bullcocky.
I think the city's probably changing in the same way that society is changing as a whole, and that I think there's a huge amount of attention on things like the police, which is really important. So Black Lives Matter Toronto being at City Hall and talking about the death of Andrew Loku and other people who have been killed by police. And there's a huge amount of scrutiny on the police right now that I think maybe didn't exist in previous years. But that's not Toronto, that's Canada-wide, that's North America. People are very concerned about policing, but it has been very visible here in the city, and that's been really heartening. But I do hope that through stuff like Black Lives Matter and through that sort of advocacy, that we can sort of move to being a more sort of just and equitable city. And we have real opportunities to do that, but we need buy-in. And we need buy-in not just from activists and from, individual people, but from, the mayor's office, from our MPs and MPPs and councillors and the chief of police and the people who matter, the people whose names you know and who appear on Metro Morning in the morning. We need that buy-in, and it needs to be structural and institutional. And it can't just be, oh yeah, you're doing good work, and then just have it not go anywhere. You need people to take ownership.
You can walk onto a streetcar and connect with somebody and have a great conversation if you're willing to take your earbuds out for a second and stop looking at your phone. There's a million stories and there's so many amazing people that you can just make connections with. And I've traveled to other places in the world, and I've not always felt the same like that. I don't think you can always do that in other places in the world like that. There's just like something about Toronto is just like people kind of bumping up against each other and being slightly uncomfortable is sort of what makes this place unique.
Thank you for listening. This week's contributing voices are Victoria James, Mary Jane Watson, M&K, and Little Marty Cho-Cho. If you have been enjoying We Muse Aloud, please subscribe to it on iTunes. Rating and reviewing the podcast will help greatly to bring it to the attention of people who have yet to discover it. You can follow us on Twitter at We Muse Aloud, and like us at facebook.com/WeMuseAloud. Please consider telling someone new about the podcast. We depend on your help to grow our audience. In the late 1970s, a rock band in Toronto made the daring decision to name themselves Toronto. Their most popular song contained the refrain, "Your daddy don't know what your mama's gonna do tonight." As a child, I often wondered what it was she was going to do, and why her husband didn't just ask her.